It looks like a few people have been able to join so far. If you wouldn't mind going ahead and filling this poll out while we wait for a few others to join, we'll get started shortly. Thank you. All right, we will go ahead and get started with the webinar. Good afternoon, I'm Callie. I'm the marketing leader here at GadellNet. I'm gonna help facilitate this event. I wanna thank you all for joining the Thrive Not Survive's second webinar on web meeting etiquette. We really hope that this webinar is gonna help you feel more comfortable and more confident during web meetings and especially those video meetings. So just a few things I wanted to let you know here at the top of the webinar. We are recording the webinar and you will be muted throughout the webinar. If you have any questions, you can put those in the Q&A function and we will have a little time at the end to go over some of those questions. We will be sharing the slides, the recording, and the Q&A with all registrants after the webinar. So with that, I think we're ready to hand it over to Derek, our Director of Microsoft Solutions, so he can go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Callie. So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're at, everybody. Again, my name is Derek Watson. I'm the Director of the Microsoft Solutions team here. And again, thank you for joining us for the second session in our Thrive Not Survive webinar series, talking about web meeting etiquette. If you missed the first session, feel free to go back. You can either take a look at our YouTube channel or, again, in our follow-up email after this. We'll have links to the prior session as well. So I encourage you to go back and take a look. Again, they all kind of build upon each other, so there's some good information in that one as well. If you did miss the one last week, just a quick introduction. My name is Derek Watson again. I'm Director of Microsoft Solutions here at GadellNet, based out of St. Louis, Missouri. I have a background of over 20 years in IT consulting around the St. Louis market, but also across North America with doing some consulting projects for different organizations. And my passions are emerging technology, productivity, and building technology community. So thanks everybody that jumped on the poll and kind of filled that out real quick. Let's check the results of that. So again, the question was, on a scale of 1 to 5, how has working remotely affected your productivity? And again, the answers range from anything from, man, I am very less or much less productive. I struggle to get anything done, all the way up to, I am drastically more productive. I'm able to get so much more done working from home. And again, I think we see a really good distribution of answers here. It looks like that for the most part, it's trending positive. Either there's not much difference, or people are able to actually get more stuff done. So that's really good information there. I'm glad that people are able to take this as an opportunity to kind of evolve their processes and get things, figure out ways to get things done while they're still kind of displaced from the office. So we'll switch back over to the presentation here. So today's topic is going to be web meeting etiquette. And again, etiquette means a lot of different things to a lot of people. Again, the technical definition is the customary code of polite behavior in society among members of a particular profession or group. But really what I kind of evolved this to mean, or what this means for me in the scope of this webinar, is really it's the proper behaviors to kind of handle web meetings, but it's also more than that. It's also tips and tricks on, again, how to get the most out of that web meeting experience. So it kind of blends into both of those things. And again, if you remember our session last week with Web Meetings 101, we talked a little bit about some things that kind of dove into a little bit into the etiquette arena. So we'll kind of expand upon those today and talk a little bit more about going beyond those items we talked about last week. I think some of these things we'll talk about today are going to be considered really common sense to a lot of folks. But the interesting thing is that some of these things are so common sense to me that I actually reached out and kind of polled some people, some friends and other business partners to get their opinion on what they thought good etiquette was in online meetings. And again, I got a pretty good extensive list out of that of both the things that I considered important, the things that other people considered important, and also just some, like I said, some common sense things that just totally went under my radar because I was just so comfortable doing those things. But at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure that we had content that was accessible for both people that were just getting started. Maybe it was one of their first times working with web meetings, all the way up to people that, you know what, we've done this for a long time. I'm a road warrior. I work remotely all the time. And we want to be able to provide some tidbits and tips there as well. So again, like I said, if you missed the previous webinar, there is some stuff that we talked about around some of these concepts. Feel free to go back and check those out to get fill in those gaps. So today's agenda. So I've kind of broken it apart into, again, it all centers around the meeting or the meeting in question. So really, we start out with creating the meeting. What are the kind of the best practice tips or kind of etiquette tips around creating a meeting, getting a meeting started, scheduling, those sorts of things. Then we'll talk about what to do kind of day of the meeting. Again, preparation, getting your work area prepped and everything ready to go for the meeting itself. Thirdly, we'll talk about what happens during the meeting. And specifically, we're going to focus on kind of two key areas, both the participants and the presenters. So again, for the most part, everybody's kind of got the same rules to follow, but presenters have a few extra responsibilities or things they probably want to consider when they're holding a web meeting. Then lastly, we'll talk about what happens afterwards. So again, some kind of good wrap-up activities or good best practice around what to do to kind of close that meeting out to get the most value of the time that you spent together. And of course, we'll save some time for Q&A at the end, so make sure you save up all your good questions so we can discuss those following the webinar. So let's get started. Let's talk about creating the meeting. So I think one of the good rules, and again, these are more than just etiquette. These are kind of good best practices to get the most out of your meetings. But again, make sure you only invite necessary resources. So again, sometimes it's tempting to bring in as many people as possible to try and solve a problem with as much force and much effort as possible. But the other thing that we've noticed during these times where we have people on web meetings is to make sure that we have the right audience. So if we have too many people, sometimes that can cause the conversation to go astray and you don't get as much done. If you don't have enough people, then we have to schedule another meeting to recap things. So again, try to make sure that you are inviting just the necessary resources and the ones that are important. Another good thing that dips into the area of etiquette is again, talking about coordinating availability with the invitees. We touched on this on the last one, using tools like Calendly and Microsoft Find Time and a few other online kind of scheduling and collaboration tools. We can make the process as seamless as possible as far as coordinating our schedules with other people. So trying to take the extra step, instead of just throwing an invite out there, and just seeing what sticks, and avoiding a back and forth chain of, yes, I'm available, no, I'm not available, or this person is, but this person isn't available. Utilizing those tools can make that a really good experience and make it a much more efficient process as far as getting the time scheduled on the calendar. The third thing is create and share an agenda. And again, this is just great best practice for meetings, but it really holds true, especially for web meetings, because there's a tendency sometimes to kind of get off track or talk about things that are going on and stuff like that. So we want to make sure that we have an agenda in place that we can kind of follow and step by step as we go through the meeting to make sure that we get the most of that time spent together. Another great tip is include any handouts. So if there's going to be something discussed, whether it be a contract or proposal, just a deliverable, make sure you have those things included in the meeting invite, whether it be a link to those items or an actual attachment with those items, so that everybody has access to those. Now, we'll talk later about sharing and how people are going to be, how we can experience those things together on the meeting. But as a good kind of a backup plan, it's always good to have those attachments handy in case something happens, in case the meeting goes offline and we just have access to audio, or somebody has to call somebody via audio only. So it's just a good idea to have those as kind of a good backup plan in place. And lastly, defining the role. So again, you don't have to, some meetings don't require this level of formality, but it's always good to know if somebody's going to be presenting, make sure that they're aware that they're going to be presenting. If they're going to be showing a document, and again, if you guys are be talking about a document, make sure you show it. Make sure it's on the screen so everybody can see it at the same time in the same place. Also making sure that there's a good note taker available. That's something that actually came up today in some of my discussions. It's always good to have somebody, because sometimes when you're actively involved in a meeting and you're having discussions face to face, it's really hard to be present. It's really hard to be attentive and listening, as well as also writing down notes and making action items as well. So it's always good to designate somebody else just to say, hey, can you just take notes? That's your primary role in this meeting, and let them know ahead of time. So that kind of covers the prep stuff for the meeting. Again, scheduling the meeting, get it on the books, making sure it's as smooth as possible to get everybody in the same place. Let's talk about the day of the meeting. And this is something we talked about last time we touched on this being dressing appropriately. So make sure that you're dressed for the context of the meeting. Again, it may be appropriate to dress one way for one meeting. It may not be appropriate to dress the same way for a different meeting. But again, use good judgment. But it's always good to kind of make sure that you're dressed appropriately for your day. Also, it's very important to create a professional setting. Again, when I say create a professional setting, make sure that your area is free of clutter, free of laundry, free of distractions, pictures, gaudy artwork, things like that. Turn on your camera if you're going to be using your camera, and take a look and see what other people see around you, and kind of stage that appropriately. Again, for more great tips about setting how to set up your video environment, again, check that previous webinar out. We talk about lighting, we talk about kind of how to stage that. But again, make sure that what the other people see on the other side is a good representation of who you are. And again, if you can't do that, there's a lot of great tools from within a lot of the products that are out there for web meetings. Again, we use Microsoft Teams to allow you to either blur the background so that people can't see what is behind you, or you can actually present a custom background to make sure people see something specific. But what it will do is if somebody walks behind you, or if there's a pet running around, or something happens, they'll just see you. All they see is you in the frame. They don't see anything else going on behind. So that actually helps out quite a bit if you have a tough time keeping that area clean and tidy. Another great tip we talked about last time was make sure you join the meeting early. Specifically, you want to make sure that you can test out the audio and video. If other people are on the line, you want to make sure you check your audio levels to make sure that they can hear you appropriately, and and you can hear them. And then also to get familiar with the controls. Make sure, again, if you're not super familiar with web meetings, you haven't done it a lot, make sure that you can go in there and find the mute button. You can turn on and off your video. You can go into chat, things like that. So just a good idea to kind of have that be prepared before you go in that meeting and get started. Be hyper aware of the noises around you. So again, I'll share a quick story. I was on a sales call a few years back with one of the leaders of the organization I was working with at the time, and we were with a potential client. And during the presentation, I just kept hearing this really loud, like squeaking noise. And after the call, I kind of got on there and said, "Hey, what was going on your end?" I kept hearing this really just obnoxious squeaky noise. And he had to think for a second. He's like, "I didn't really hear anything, but it's possible it was my chair." And afterwards, we kind of tested it out and found out, yeah, his chair made just a really loud kind of grinding noise. And I guess in the proximity to the microphone, it just amplified it on the call. So it's extremely distracting, extremely tough to get past for that call. So again, just be hyper aware of like the noises around you. Again, whether it be chairs, or like if you have hardwood and you're rolling around on hardwood, or if you have, if you're taking a drink, or you're crumpling papers or things like that, those things can be really amplified depending on how you have your audio set up, and if you're using a microphone that's built into your laptop versus in a headset. Also, there's a lot of other things as well that, again, the more traditional things we think about, whether it be pets or children or television noise in the background or birds. And obviously, we want to limit that as much as possible. But it's those other things you really don't think of, like I said, squeaking chairs, or, again, typing on a keyboard, things like that. You want to make sure you reduce those as much as possible on a call. And then lastly, have a backup plan. We touched on this a little bit, but again, going into the meeting, yeah, we trust the meeting's going to work. It works 99.9% of the time, but you know what? What about that one time it doesn't work? Well, let's make sure we have an audio bridge available. Make sure you have a phone to be able to dial into, or you can call that number. Again, make sure you have that attachment or that handout already at the ready in case we can't share our screen. Just make sure you have all those things covered, especially in those really important meetings, client meetings, sales meetings, executive meetings. Like in those key instances, make sure you're extra prepared just to kind of avoid those pitfalls that may happen. So we talked about kind of meeting prep. We talked about things to do like the day of to get your kind of your space ready and yourself ready for that meeting. But let's talk about what happens during the meeting. So again, we're going to break this into both participants and then also the presenters or the people that are kind of running the meeting themselves. So rule number one, and again, I should probably just put this in every single webinar: mute your microphone. The moment you join, unless you're actively presenting, or again, unless you're delivering a webinar, make sure you mute that microphone so that again, there's no reason for it to be unmuted unless you're speaking. It's going to save you embarrassing times for when the kids run in and ask for favor, lunch or whatever, or help with their homework. It's going to save you from every time that dog barks, every time the mailman comes to the door and the dogs freak out. It's going to save you from so many different those instances. So again, just get really handy with that mute button and just mute and unmute yourself as you're talking. One thing to note too is that some of these more advanced platforms like Microsoft Teams actually has a notification on it. So if you mute yourself and you try and talk, it flashes up a little warning message that says, "Hey, by the way, you're muted. Make sure you unmute when you talk." So that's a great thing that helps out to encourage that behavior of muting yourself and doesn't allow you to sit there and be chatting on mute for 30 minutes while people don't know you're talking. Secondly, speak clearly and loudly. And again, I know it's very easy to fall into old habits and just kind of talk. When you're talking in the same room, it's very easy to kind of read social cues, read lip movements, but sometimes you have to put a little bit more effort behind how you talk when you're on a web meeting. So again, common sense, but speak clearly and loudly so people can hear you and understand you. This is a tough one. This is one that, again, people kind of learn over time, but that's really try not to interrupt others. And it's tough because during a like I said, in-person meeting, you have social cues you can read. You can wait for pauses in the conversation to interject your thoughts. It's very difficult on an online meeting. Video helps. Video helps because you can kind of see when somebody's getting ready to say something, or they can possibly, alert the audience that something's going to happen. But again, try to let the conversation play out as it happens. But there's some key ways that you can let people know that you're ready to speak without actually interrupting the conversation. And those key ways are, number one, if you're on video, raise your hand just like you were in elementary school, right? I know it seems a little bit odd at first, but it's an easy way for people to say, "Hey, by the way, I have something to say. Just call on me whenever whenever you get a chance." Some of the tools actually have a built-in hand raise function. So Microsoft Teams actually has a hand raise function where you can click the button, say raise your hand, and it'll alert everybody on the meeting that, hey, this guy wants to say something or has a point to make. That helps out when you don't have video. You still have that function to be able to use. And then lastly, if you don't have video, you don't have the hand raise function, most modern web meetings have a chat function. So go into the chat and say, hey, real quick, I'd like to say something after you make your point. So again, a courteous way to not disrupt the conversation, but also be able to get your point heard and your point across in a meeting. This goes without saying, but it's tough, especially when you're home all day long. But that's avoid distraction. So again, for the meeting, make sure you stay seated, stay present in the meeting, give it your full attention. It's very tempting to be on on your keyboard, multitasking, responding to emails, doing other things. But again, in the era of video, and when you have the video on, it's really it's tough. It's very somebody's presenting and they look over and they see everybody else looking at other screens. It's just like you're in a meeting room. It can be very off-putting. So make sure that if you must do those things, make sure you're not on video. But if you are on video, make sure you're giving the full attention to the people that are on the other side. And just in general, if possible, use video. And again, we talked about this a little bit in the last series or session, but again, this is a new thing for a lot of people. Hopefully people are feeling more and more comfortable about showing themselves on video, but again, it's more about the relationship than it is the individual. So again, having that conversation via video, you can continue to read social cues. You can continue to see when there's great places to interject your portion of the conversation. So again, it adds a lot of value. So I encourage people to do it if at all possible for their meetings. And to that end, sometimes it'll take a little bit extra effort, but you need to show that you're listening. And I know that goes without saying. And again, when you're in a web meeting or in a face-to-face meeting, it's much easier because again, it's just kind of common practice. But it's way harder to do that when you're kind of disconnected. So again, look at the camera. A tip we shared last week was make sure your video call is positioned directly underneath your webcam. So when you're looking at the other people talking on the screen, you're actually looking at the webcam. I know it's very tempting to look at yourself and see, do I have something in my teeth? Is there, how's my collar look? But don't be tempted. Don't look at yourself, look at the people or look at the camera as you're talking, and do common things like nod and smile and show that you're listening to what they're saying and kind of and acknowledging their thoughts. Speaking of thoughts, another great tip was ask before sharing long thoughts. So again, you have a natural conversation flowing, you're going back and forth, but you've got a kind of a long point to make. Make sure that again, before you kind of go into that long effort of talking, let everybody else know, hey, I'm getting ready to say something for a few minutes. Does anybody else have any points before we bring that up? And again, just a great thing to help out the flow of the conversation, the flow of the meeting, and make sure you get the most out of that time and not make sure everybody gets heard, equally. And then lastly, don't eat during a meeting. Now this is, obviously these rules are guidelines. And again, I say this, and yesterday I had to eat my lunch during a meeting, but it's all about context. It was a team meeting. We were on video, but I turned off my video while I was eating, muted my mic while I was doing it as well. And again, it was just it was a one-way conversation, not as much as a bi-directional conversation. That being said, if you're on a meeting and you're crunching away on chips and you've got your microphone unmuted, it's not gonna be a great experience for the other people on the call. So again, general rule of thumb: don't do something on a video or like on a web meeting that you wouldn't do in a face-to-face meeting. That's just a really good thing to kind of think about. So that kind of covers what to do during a meeting for the participants. Let's talk about what to do during the meeting, the extra responsibilities of the presenters or the owners of the meeting. So one of the first things you want to do is kind of that presenter or the owner of the meeting is we want to make sure everybody has access to the meeting. So again, once that meeting starts, if you notice that there's people visibly absent that are required or should be on that meeting, make sure you reach out to them via text or email and say, hey, is everything okay? Were you able to join? Are you having issues? Just to make sure that they're not stuck out there and not able to access the meeting. Also with external parties as well, it's a common thing because maybe they're not familiar with the system that you use. So just make sure you reach out to them and see if they need help joining the meeting. Presenters and owners, and really this falls on everybody, but primarily presenters and owners, is they want to make sure that they mute other people if there's feedback or background noise. But to follow that up, though, a really good practice that I found is once you do that, make sure you just send them an instant message or a text and say, hey, by the way, I muted you. I heard a lot of stuff on your phone. That way they know that they've been muted in case they didn't see it, and they don't just start talking and realize they're on mute. But again, this happens a lot. I wouldn't take too much offense to that because again, sometimes, like I said earlier, you don't know what other people are hearing through your microphone. If you got a squeaky chair, if you got papers that are rustling around in your desk, or the keyboard is making just a ton of noise because your microphone is right next to it. So again, don't hesitate to mute other people, but it's always just common courtesy just to let them know you did it. Another big one too is let people know if you plan to record the meeting. So again, I think that probably goes without saying, but if you do plan on recording the meeting, make sure you just give everybody a heads up to say, hey, by the way, we're gonna record this meeting. Just out of common courtesy. Another thing is if you have a large audience, you need to take a more active role as a facilitator. So again, to make sure you get the most out of that time, and again, if you don't have a clear agenda or don't have clear things you're trying to accomplish, make sure that you're the one that's calling on people to make sure all opinions are heard and all the right people are talking during the meeting. So you have that added responsibility of not only keeping people muted and keep people on task, but you also need to make sure that everybody has their voices heard and is able to contribute. Another one is share your screen. And this is semi-common sense, but sometimes I've run into situations where people have not done that. They just send an attachment out and ask people to follow along at home. We have the capabilities. Use the screen sharing capabilities so that, again, everybody's looking at the same page, everybody's working from the same document. And again, it's just a much more natural experience. But one bonus tip around screen sharing is when you're sharing your screen, you can zoom in very easily. And for Windows, it's just the Windows key and plus, the Windows and the plus key. And that'll allow you to bring up the magnifier. You can zoom in on portions of the screen. So again, if you're looking at a detailed spreadsheet or a Word document where the font is really small, that's an easy way to kind of zoom in on a specific section and take a better look at that. So we talked about pre-meeting, we talked about kind of scheduling the meeting, we talked about what to do during the meeting, and we have a couple quick things to talk about what to do after the meeting to kind of get, again, make sure you get the most value out of that time you spend. So first off, send a follow-up out to all your participants. Make sure you include minutes, action items, things that they're responsible for. Again, to make sure that that time wasn't just spent just chatting about the weather, but you actually got some stuff done and we kind of know where we're moving towards. Additionally, make sure you publish any recordings or share whiteboards. So again, if you recorded the meeting, if you had a digital whiteboard, or perhaps even you're fortunate enough to have a physical whiteboard or paper in your office that you took some notes or something. A lot of our tools, like for example, the OneNote client for your mobile device or the Teams client for your mobile device has a great camera in it that you can actually take pictures of those things and broadcast those pretty easily. So yeah, don't hesitate to capture those things and broadcast those out to the rest of the participants. And then lastly, solicit feedback. So again, after you're done with the meeting and everything's good, send some feedback out to the participants and say, hey, what did you like about the meeting? What did you not like? What are some things that we could do better to make sure that you feel that your voice was heard, your opinion was heard, and what can we do better next time to make sure that that's accounted for? All right. Well, that is all the content we have for today. So while you guys are kind of getting your Q&A stuff together and Callie's kind of getting those together for us to talk about, I wanted to spend a quick second on talking about GadellNet, who has graciously sponsored my time today to talk to you guys. Many of you are our clients. Some of you guys are potential clients. So I just want to talk a little about what I do at GadellNet and kind of how we help our partners with their digital transformation. So again, Derek Watson, Director of the Microsoft Solutions Practice. We leverage a lot of Microsoft technologies to power the digital transformation of our customers. So again, using tools like Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive and the entire Office 365 stack, we go into our clients and take a look at their processes and help them digitize them, move them to the cloud, and make sure that they are working as effectively and efficiently as possible. So if you have any needs in that area, feel free to reach out to me. Again, Derek Watson, you can search on LinkedIn, you can send me an email, go ahead and drop me a call anytime. Love to talk about this stuff, obviously, and love to hear your feedback from this webinar and see what other things that you would like to hear in the future. So with that, we're going to roll over to the questions. I am going to ask Callie to kind of present those and we'll chat through those.
All right, we do have a couple of questions, so I will get started here with the first one. What's worse, looking bad on a video call or opting out of video?
That's a great question. I think that it obviously depends upon the context of the situation. However, I think that a lot of people are given a lot more grace these days because of just the situation that we're all in. So again, I would, if I was a woman, I would not be afraid to join a call. You know, again, if I didn't have my makeup on, or wasn't dressed up, or even a man to that end, if I wasn't dressed up appropriate for the call. It really depends, though. Again, if you're joining a sales call or if you're going to be on an important meeting, I would opt out of the video. But again, I think that most people are cautious about turning their video on. And I just want to make sure that, again, everybody's in the same boat. Everybody's on the same page. We're all kind of in this together. So don't worry about you know, again, don't be hypercritical, I guess I should say, of how you look and in your situation. With the tips that I've given today, I think you can kind of set yourself up for success. But yeah, I would not forego video just because you think you have a bad hair day, if that's the onus of the question.
Okay, great. Next question. Do you have to have permission from all participants in order to record and share a web meeting?
Great question. So this is one of those ones that I'll just start out with a legal disclaimer. State and local laws apply. But for Missouri, I believe, not a lawyer, don't quote me, but I believe Missouri is a one-party state, so I don't believe you're required to give that notice. But for most tools, especially Microsoft Teams, I know for a fact, when you do start that recording, it actually broadcasts a message across the banner across the message to all participants that says, hey, by the way, this meeting is being recorded, you know, just to let you know. So again, etiquette dictates, definitely tell people. The tools, they're going to enforce that policy by telling people as well. But at the end of the day, you have to kind of refer back to your state and local laws about how about recording conversations.
Okay.
That was a great question.
Yeah, it was. It doesn't look like we have any more questions that have come through, so we can give it another minute or so, and if nothing else comes through, then we can wrap up.
Okay, great. Well, while we take that quick minute, like I said, I just want to say if you come across any questions or have any other follow-up conversations you'd like to have, or just in general want to understand how GadellNet can help you better perform better meetings, you know, incorporate these technologies into your organization, again, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, email, phone. Love to have these conversations. Love to talk about this stuff. So last call for questions. Callie, do we have anything else come in? Otherwise, we can wrap things up.
We did not have any other questions, so I guess we are ready to wrap it up. And I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for your great questions. We will, as we told you, we're going to share this recording with you. We're going to share last week's recording with you, and we'll also share the slides and the questions. So if there's anything else you need in the meantime, you can reach out to Derek or I. But with that, we say goodbye and thank you again.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.